Hi, my name's Venora. 3 days after I gave birth, my husband vanished, took $2 million, left me bleeding in a hospital bed, and wrote, "Not my problem anymore." 7 days later, his mother threw me into the freezing rain with my newborn. They thought I'd break. But 5 months later, they saw me again. Wrapped in silk, standing in a penthouse they could never afford, and whispering "husband" to a man who wasn't him. They dropped to their knees. But do you think I forgave them? Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? And what would you have done in my place? The hospital room smelled like bleach and plastic. Too clean. Too quiet. I was supposed to be celebrating, holding my son, Kiran, in my arms, feeling that overwhelming love people always gush about. Instead, I was cold, hollow. My body ached in places I didn't even know could ache, and the silence around me was louder than any cry. 3 days ago, I gave birth to a miracle. 3 days ago, I thought I still had a husband. Dante had left the room that morning, said he needed coffee. The nurse smiled politely, told me to rest, that he'd be back soon. I watched him walk out in his perfect slacks and cuffed shirt. No wrinkles, no sweat, not even a shadow of exhaustion on his face, like I didn't just go through 20 hours of labor to bring his child into the world. That was the last I saw of him. The hours crawled. I held Kieran tighter every time the door opened, hoping it was him, hoping maybe he'd walk in with flowers or one of those tired but happy smiles I used to see in hospital photos online. But it was just nurses, a janitor, someone checking my chart. No Dante. I told myself he was overwhelmed, that maybe he was having a moment outside, pacing and thinking. Men don't always know how to process this kind of thing, right? But when night came, and still no sign of him, that excuse turned into something bitter, ugly. I tried calling, texting. No answer. I asked the nurse to check if he'd left anything behind. Maybe his phone had died. Maybe he got called away on an emergency. She gave me a look I didn't like. One of those tight-lipped, sorry you're in for it looks. 15 minutes later, she came back holding a folded piece of paper. "This was left at the nurse station," she said. "Had your name on it." I reached for it with a trembling hand. My palms were clammy, my stitches burned, my arms were shaking from holding Kiran so long, but I didn't want to let go. I tucked him into the crook of my arm and unfolded the note with my free hand. It was just one sentence. Not my problem anymore. That's all it said. No name, no signature, no goodbye. Just those 5 words, scrawled in his handwriting. I'd recognize that slanted R anywhere. My throat closed. I couldn't speak. I couldn't scream. It was like the pain of labor all over again, but this time inside my chest, contracting, tearing, bleeding. I felt heat rise in my face, but no tears. Just shock, just disbelief so deep it numbed everything. The nurse stood awkwardly at the door, like she didn't know whether to offer comfort or walk away. I didn't blame her. What could anyone say? Kieran stirred against my skin. I looked down at him. Tiny, pink, perfect. His little mouth puckered like he was dreaming. I had no one else to hand him to. No partner beside me. No husband rubbing my back, telling me we'd get through this. I was it. I was all he had. And that hit harder than any note ever could. Later that night, I stared at the ceiling tiles, each one a reminder of the hours ticking by. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. I clutched Kieran and listened to his shallow baby breaths. I thought about the baby registry Dante insisted we do, high-end cribs, designer diaper bags, all the things that made us look like a power couple ready for the next chapter. It was never about love for him. Not really. It was always about image. He liked expensive things, luxury cars, rare whiskeys, business-class flights. He liked making people think we were untouchable. I played along because I thought it meant we were building something. I thought he wanted a life with me. Turns out, he just wanted the life. Not me. A few weeks before I went into labor, I caught him texting a number he kept under the name Frank. I knew no Frank. The texts were late at night, short, secretive. He brushed it off, told me I was hormonal, told me I was being paranoid. I wanted to believe him. I needed to, because admitting the truth would have shattered everything, and I was already too pregnant to pick up the pieces. Now I didn't have a choice. I picked up the note again, the paper crinkling between my fingers. My tears finally came, slow, hot, heavy. They soaked the corner of the note until the ink bled into the fibers. I looked down at Kiran. His eyes opened just a sliver, blue like his father's, but I prayed they'd change. I didn't want him to carry anything of Dante, not his eyes, not his coldness. "It's just us now," I whispered. He let out a soft whimper, like he understood. Outside the window, rain started to fall, soft at first, then harder. The sky turned gray as the sun vanished behind the storm clouds. I thought that was the worst of it. But the worst wasn't over yet. 7 days later, his mother came for me. And when she came, she didn't bring comfort. She brought a storm. It was a Wednesday. I remember because the hallway TV had the local weather playing on mute, and I could see the forecast flashing warnings about severe thunderstorms. Kiran was just 10 days old. I still hadn't fully healed, my body moving slower than my mind could keep up. My thoughts were scattered, but my arms knew exactly what to do. Cradle, rock, protect. Then came the knock. 3 gentle taps. I looked up, half expecting a nurse, maybe someone checking on discharge papers. Instead, there she stood, Corvina, Dante's mother. Her silhouette blocked the doorframe like she owned the building. Pearl earrings, gold chain, bright red lipstick that didn't move when she smiled, which wasn't really a smile at all. It was one of those polite, tight-lipped expressions that never touched the eyes. "Well," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, "look at you." I sat up straighter, clutching Karen. "Corvina, thank you for coming." She walked over, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. "Of course I came. My son left, didn't he? Someone had to show up." Her perfume hit me a second later. Sharp, synthetic, too strong for a hospital room. It filled the space, making it harder to breathe. She looked down at Kiran, tilted her head. "Cute. He looks just like Dante did as a baby." I tried to smile, but it faltered. "Would you like to hold him?" She didn't answer, just kept staring at me. Then she sat in the chair beside the bed and crossed her legs. "I'm going to be blunt, Venora," she began, smoothing the hem of her coat. "You've put our family in a difficult position." I blinked. I didn't ask Dante to leave." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Men don't just vanish unless they're pushed. You think marriage is easy? You think motherhood gives you a free pass to fall apart?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My throat tightened. "He left a note. 5 words, that's all. No explanation, no discussion." She waved her hand like she was swatting away smoke. "Yes, I saw the note. Poor taste, but you must have seen it coming. Dante's always been ambitious. You, on the other hand..." Her gaze swept over me like I was a pile of laundry. "Not exactly a match made in heaven." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She stood up, smoothed her coat again. "Here's what's going to happen. You'll stay at my place for a few days, just until you figure out your next move. But you cannot stay forever." I felt my heart stumble. "What do you mean?" She turned toward the window. The rain had started, tapping against the glass in a steady rhythm. "Dante drained the joint account. $2 million. Gone. You understand? Gone." I gasped. "What?" "Don't act surprised. You married a man who knew how to move money. The question is, Why didn't you know where it was going? I could barely sit upright. The world tilted. He told me we were investing, real estate. He said it was for the baby. Corvina turned back to face me. Well, clearly it was for someone else's baby. He's gone, Venora. And now you are too. I shook my head. I have nowhere to go. That's not my concern, she said, already walking toward the door. You're not my responsibility. And frankly, you never were. 7 days later, she made good on her word. It was pouring. One of those deep southern rains where the sky cracks open and throws buckets at the earth like it's trying to wash it clean. I was staying in the guest room at her house, a tiny upstairs space with peeling wallpaper and a crib she never helped me set up. She walked in without knocking. Time's up, she said. I was nursing Kieran, his tiny hands grasping at my nightgown. Corvina, please. Just a few more days. I'm still healing. She didn't flinch. You've had enough days. You're not the first woman to be left, and you won't be the last. Now pack your things. I was too stunned to move. Where will I go? She tossed a plastic grocery bag at me. Figure it out. That's what mothers do, isn't it? Survive. I wrapped Kieran in the softest blanket I had. Thin, but it was all I'd brought. My arms trembled as I gathered our things into a diaper bag. She followed me to the door like a prison warden. Outside, the rain was relentless. I turned to her one last time. I did nothing to deserve this. Corvina's eyes narrowed. Life doesn't care what you deserve. It only gives what you can take. She slammed the door behind me. I stood on the porch for a second, wind whipping my soaked hair across my face. Then I stepped off the curb and into the street. Lightning flashed across the sky, thunder following like a threat. Kieran whimpered in my arms. I pressed him closer. I didn't cry. I couldn't, not with him watching. The rain drenched us in seconds. My shoes squelched as I walked. I didn't know where I was going. Just away. Away from her. Away from him. Away from everything that felt like home but never really was. I kept moving, step by soaked step. And when I finally stopped under an awning at a closed gas station, I looked down at my son's sleeping face, his lips twitching in dreams I prayed were gentle. I thought I'd reached rock bottom, I whispered. But rock bottom kept sinking. It wasn't just about abandonment. It was about everything he took from me and how he left me to drown in debt. The night after Corvina slammed that door behind me, I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of a shelter bathroom, rocking Kieran in my arms, while fluorescent lights flickered overhead and someone sobbed in the next stall. The ache in my lower back throbbed from walking so long in wet clothes, but I was too afraid to close my eyes. I was scared I might miss something, a shift in sound, a breath that didn't belong, the kind of danger women sense before it happens. I stayed up until the staff switched shifts and a new worker let me sit in the office to charge my phone. That's when I saw it. An alert from the bank app I hadn't checked in over a week. I clicked through with trembling fingers. Account closed. Another one. Overdrawn. A third. Denied access. I blinked, thinking maybe it was a glitch. Or maybe Corvina had tampered with something again. But the more I tapped, the more obvious it became. Every account Dante and I once shared, checking, savings, even the investment one he made me sign paperwork for, was gone. Or worse, locked. My name wasn't listed on any of them anymore. 2 years ago, Dante had convinced me to let him consolidate everything for better returns. Let me handle the finances, he said. That's what husbands do. I didn't argue. I'd grown up in a home where men handled the money and women stretched it. And I wanted peace. I always chose peace. Later that week, after a nurse from the shelter helped me arrange a meeting at a legal aid office, I showed the printouts to the volunteer attorney. This is organized, she said, flipping through pages. These transfers didn't happen overnight. He knew what he was doing. She pointed at a series of recurring wire transfers. Same amount, same name. RMM Holdings, LLC. I looked this up, she continued. That's a shell company, registered in Nevada. Oh, guess who's on the filing as beneficiary? I stared at her. Dante? She nodded slowly. And someone else. A woman named Rachel Montgomery. Rachel. I remembered the name from months ago, back when Dante started coming home later than usual. He said she was a real estate partner. I even shook her hand once at one of those fancy fundraising galas his company hosted. The kind where women wear dresses you can't afford and men shake hands like they're sealing world deals. I asked the attorney, "What can I do?" She folded her hands. Realistically, not much unless you can prove fraud or coercion, but you should get a copy of all legal documents from the time you were married, just to check everything. I didn't wait. The next day, I called an old coworker from Dante's office, a woman named Janelle, someone I'd always gotten along with during office parties and company trips. She didn't know about the divorce. She hadn't heard about the baby either. But then she said something that knocked the air out of me. I just saw Dante updated the property deeds, she said. Looks like he removed a co-owner. I assumed it was a business partner. My stomach dropped. You're sure? I asked. Janelle hesitated. I mean, your name used to be on that Midtown condo, right? The one you guys remodeled last year? Yes. It's not anymore. I hung up without saying goodbye and rushed to the county clerk's office the next day. I stood in line for hours with Karen strapped to my chest, asleep against me while sweat soaked the baby wrap. When it was finally my turn, the clerk pulled up the file. Is this the property? She asked, turning the screen toward me. There it was. Our home. Or at least what used to be, except now it only had Dante's name. Where's mine? I asked. She raised an eyebrow. Says here there was an amendment signed 2 months ago, by both parties. I stared at her. I never signed anything. She leaned closer to the screen. Then you might want to speak to someone in legal. This signature, she squinted, it doesn't look like yours. The clerk printed a copy and I held it in my hands, stunned. It was my name, my signature, but not my handwriting. He had forged it. He didn't just take the money. He erased me from everything we'd built, the bank accounts, the deed, even our shared business ventures. It was like I never existed. Walking out of that building, I felt a strange hollowness, not rage, not fear, just space, as if someone had gutted out my chest and left behind air. That night, back at the shelter, I sat cross-legged on the cot while Karen slept beside me. I pulled the forged papers from my bag and spread them on the mattress like a map of war. This wasn't some heated breakup. It wasn't impulsive. Dante planned every inch of this, months in advance, and I let him, not because I was weak, not because I was dumb, but because I had chosen silence. I had believed love meant trust, and trust meant obedience. I thought asking too many questions made me controlling. I thought peace was something earned through quiet. But that silence, it became a cage, and I built every bar of it myself. I could still hear Corvina's voice ringing in my ears. You're not my responsibility. You never were. Maybe that was true, but I was Kieran's responsibility now, and he was mine. I reached out and traced my fingers over his soft little hand. He curled them around mine without waking. That's when it hit me. Dante didn't just leave me. He tried to erase me. The first humiliation didn't happen behind closed doors. It happened under the eyes of strangers, when I had no strength left to defend myself. It had only been 2 weeks since I'd given birth. My body was still aching, my thoughts scattered, and my heart fragile. There was a small church charity drive that Sunday. I wasn't looking for charity, just maybe a kind face. Someone to say, "You're not crazy. You didn't deserve this." I needed a human voice that wasn't in my head. I wrapped Kieran in his softest blanket, the one with faded elephants printed on it, and walked the 4 blocks to the church. The sky was overcast, the kind that made shadows look longer, and every step felt heavier than the last. Inside the community hall, folding tables were lined with old books, used toys, casseroles in foil pans, and donated clothing. The smell of baked beans and lemon bars filled the air. I kept my head down and offered a polite nod to the women serving punch. Then came the stares. At first I thought I was imagining it. Maybe my clothes were wrinkled, or I looked as exhausted as I felt, but the murmurs started to slither through the room like smoke. "There she is," one woman whispered too loudly, nudging the elbow of her friend. "That's the one." I glanced behind me, thinking they meant someone else, but when I turned, they were still staring at me. Not just staring, dissecting. Judging. Another voice cut the air like glass. "So you're that poor girl he left. I'd die of shame if I were you." My legs went weak. I gripped Kieran tighter, his little chest rising and falling against mine. I tried to take a step back, but a shuffle of chairs behind me blocked the way. Then I saw her, Corvina, my mother-in-law. Perfectly poised, lips painted deep mauve, draped in a silk shawl like she was headed to a gala, not a charity drive. She smiled like a snake sizing up its next bite. "Ladies," she said sweetly, placing a manicured hand on the shoulder of the woman who'd insulted me. "I hate to say this, but it's true. My son gave her everything, and how did she repay him? Emptied the accounts? Demanded more. Always more." It hit me harder than anything Dante ever said or did. She was rewriting the story, making me the villain. "She spent his money like water," Corvina continued, her voice now a stage performance. "The poor boy couldn't breathe. She drowned him in debt and drama. I warned him." I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came. It wasn't that I didn't have words. It was that nothing I said would change the version people had already decided to believe. The women around me started nodding, eyebrows raised in that faux pity way that's just a mask for cruelty. Someone even chuckled. "She looks sweet," one said. "But you know, those are always the worst kind." I should have walked out. I should have screamed. But instead, I stood still. My silence didn't feel like surrender this time. It felt like storage, a place to keep every word, every lie, every stare. For later. I memorized faces. I watched who laughed, who avoided eye contact, who whispered behind napkins. Corvina's eyes met mine across the room, smug and triumphant, but she mistook my silence for submission. I bounced Kieran gently in my arms, letting the rhythm calm my thoughts. My jaw clenched, but my eyes stayed dry. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because I was saving my tears for the moment they'd matter. I walked out slowly. No dramatics. No rush. Just enough for every heel click on the tile floor to echo in that room like a warning bell. And at the door, I turned once, not to plead, not to explain, but to make sure Corvina saw me looking straight at her when I said clear and steady, "Careful. Stories have a way of circling back to the truth." It started small. One voice, one truth, one refusal to carry their shame anymore. It wasn't loud. It wasn't some grand speech in front of a crowd. It was quiet. Me, alone in a government office, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, Kieran asleep in my arms, and a woman across the desk with a clipboard and a forced smile. "We understand it's been difficult," she said, eyes flicking down to the form between us. "But given your current situation, housing instability, financial risk, emotional strain, we believe temporary custody through the paternal side may be in Kieran's best interest." She slid the paper forward, gently, like it was some act of mercy. I stared at the signature line. My name, a blank space, a pen resting beside it, and my son. His small hand wrapped around the collar of my shirt, breathing peacefully, trusting me with every ounce of his tiny being. He had no idea someone was trying to take him away, that I had been pushed this far, to the edge of something I didn't recognize. My hand moved, the pen trembled, but then he blinked, just once. Kieran's eyes opened wide, still cloudy and new, but focused on me, and I froze. "No one will take you from me." I whispered it without realizing, the words sliding past the lump in my throat. I dropped the pen like it had burned me, snatched the paper off the desk and ripped it in half before the woman could react. "I'm not signing anything," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't shake, either. We left. That night, the wind rattled the loose window panes of the shelter room I'd been assigned. Kieran was asleep in a donated bassinet beside my cot, wrapped in an oversized towel because all the baby blankets were taken. I sat on the floor, my knees pulled up to my chest. The moonlight stretched thin across the wooden planks, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. Not from sadness, but from the weight of almost giving in. Then I remembered something. Dante's old phone. He'd left it in the drawer of the guest room nightstand back when we were pretending to be a family. I kept it out of habit, thinking maybe it had photos or contacts I might need. I dug it out of the plastic bin under my cot and powered it on. The battery was almost dead, but it came to life. No passcode. It felt like a trap, being opened that easily. I tapped through messages, and there it was, thread after thread, him and her name saved as Caramel, like I wouldn't notice. Photos, receipts, plans. They were laughing at me. One message stood out. "Drain her, erase her, and she'll disappear. She's soft. She won't fight back. Your mom said it's time." My breath stopped. My chest tightened, like something inside me cracked. This wasn't a man who broke under pressure. This was a man who planned to destroy me, planned to erase me, legally, financially, and emotionally, and raise a glass about it with the woman he replaced me with. I clutched the phone, thumb hovering over the delete button, but I didn't press it. I saved every single message, screenshots, backups, sent them to an email I'd created just for that purpose. For the first time, I had proof. Real proof. They didn't just abandon me. They orchestrated the fall. I looked at Kieran. He shifted in his sleep, the tiniest sigh escaping his lips. And I thought about what silence had cost me. All those years of not asking questions, letting Dante handle the finances, letting Corvina belittle me in passive-aggressive little doses until I stopped standing tall, letting myself believe love meant shrinking. No more. I was tired. Yes, but tired wasn't the same as defeated. In the shelter lobby the next morning, I asked the intake worker for a pen and notebook. She raised an eyebrow, probably expecting another complaint form. But I didn't write a complaint. I started a list. Names, dates, quotes from those texts, what bank accounts I remembered, property deeds, anything I could use, even if I didn't know how just yet. It wasn't a plan, not exactly, but it was the start of one. Before bed, I stood over Karen's crib. The bars were loose, the mattress thin, but he was safe, and I whispered to him, steady this time. "They think they buried me, but I'm not done yet." The first push wasn't loud, but it was enough to shake them, enough to make them realize I wasn't gone. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to plead. All I had to do was show up and tell the truth, one sentence at a time. It happened on a Thursday morning. I'd been invited, or rather, quietly included, in a community business forum held in the back room of a local nonprofit building. It wasn't glamorous. Coffee in styrofoam cups, people in thrifted blazers trying to look important. But it was a room where names carried weight. Dante's name came up, loudly. "Dante Everell," someone said, tapping their pen against the table. "He's been a huge contributor this quarter. That family donation covered almost the entire women's shelter renovation." Murmurs of approval followed. Nods. A couple of claps. I didn't interrupt. Not at first. I waited. I listened. And then, casually, I cleared my throat and asked, "Which account did that donation come from?" The room fell quiet, not because I'd raised my voice, but because no one expected me to speak. I went on, just as softly, because if it's the one ending in 1049, that was my account. My name was taken off it, after the funds were withdrawn. They didn't know what to do with that. Eyes darted. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their seat. No one clapped anymore. I didn't need to prove anything that day. I didn't need to drag anyone down. I just needed to plant doubt. Let it sit. Let it spread. That afternoon, I walked home slower than usual. Kiran was strapped to my chest, sleeping soundly. The sun was out, the first real warmth we'd had in days, and I let it hit my face. But by Monday morning, I felt the heat from another kind of sun. Corvina. She was faster than I expected. Maybe she'd heard about the meeting. Maybe she just felt me breathing too freely. I was summoned to the family services office. The tone was polite but clipped. "Just a wellness check," they said. I walked in holding Kiran, who was teething and fussy. I looked exhausted, because I was, and I could feel their eyes sizing me up before I even sat down. The woman across the desk had a file already open. "We've received a concern," she began, not looking at me, "about your ability to provide consistent care." I didn't flinch. "From whom?" "I'm not at liberty to—" "It was Corvina, wasn't it?" I said, my voice flat. "She's saying I'm unstable, that I neglect my child, that I'm not fit." She blinked, just once, then shifted in her seat. "We take all reports seriously." So do I thought. But I didn't say it. Instead, I pulled out a notebook I'd brought with me, the one where I'd written everything down. Dates, comments, the time she left me in the rain, the fact she'd taken me off the lease of a property I was living in. Screenshots from Dante's phone, even the quote, "Drain her, erase her, and she'll disappear." I laid it all out on the desk, one page at a time. I didn't accuse. I didn't cry. I let the weight of evidence speak. The social worker didn't say much, but I saw the shift. The suspicion aimed at me started bending the other way. I walked out without another word. Kiran tucked against my chest, his tiny fingers curled in the collar of my shirt. Later that evening, while rocking him to sleep, I looked out the shelter window and thought about everything they were still trying to take. But here's what they didn't understand. Lies are loud, but truth lingers. I wasn't the same woman they'd discarded in a hospital bed. I wasn't shaking anymore when they raised their voices. I wasn't waiting for someone to save me. They had underestimated what quiet could become when it refused to die. They thought I was harmless. That was their first mistake. I whispered to the room, not just to Kiran, but to myself too. They wanted war, and I was ready to fight without raising my voice. They knew where to hit me hardest, and they struck without mercy. The court summons came without warning. A beige envelope slid into my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked between a grocery flyer and an overdue electricity bill. I opened it right there on the porch, barefoot, Kiran chewing on a teething ring against my hip. Petition for full custody, Dante Everill v. Venora Everill. I couldn't breathe. By Thursday, I was standing in family court, under those blinding fluorescent lights that seem to wash all the color from your skin and all the warmth from your body. My palms were cold, though I kept rubbing them together as if I could trick my nerves into calming down. Dante walked in like he was headed to brunch. Crisp suit, new watch, the same smirk I used to confuse with charm. The judge entered. We stood, we sat, and then the unraveling began. Dante's lawyer painted a picture, not of a grieving father, but of a savior. He claimed Dante was deeply concerned for the welfare of the child, citing false medical notes that said I was suffering from untreated postpartum psychosis.
They flashed screenshots of text messages, ones I never sent, talking about wanting to escape and leave it all behind. They even had a statement from one of Dante's acquaintances claiming they saw me leave Kieran crying in a car while I argued on the phone. I hadn't even owned a car in 3 months. I kept my hands folded in my lap, but I could feel them shaking under the surface. My tongue felt thick. My heart was pounding like it wanted out of my chest. The judge glanced my way. "Mrs. Everill, do you have a response to these allegations?" My throat burned. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Behind me, I could feel Corvina watching. I didn't need to turn around to know she was smiling. She was always there, like a shadow you can't scrub out, feeding off the wreckage she helped create. When the judge called for a recess, I stumbled out of the courtroom like someone coming out of a car crash, walking, but not really present. The hallway was filled with people, crying kids, tired lawyers, disappointed families. I leaned against the wall near the exit, trying to breathe, when I saw her. She looked no older than 22. Her baby couldn't have been more than 6 months old, clinging to her shirt like Kiran did to mine. A bailiff was talking to her in that voice people use when they're pretending to be polite, low and sharp like a blade wrapped in cotton. "You should have come earlier," he said. "We're not going to wait for you next time. You can't keep showing up like this." The young woman just nodded, her eyes wide, blinking fast like she was trying not to cry. The baby started fussing. A woman nearby shook her head and muttered something under her breath, something cruel, something too familiar. And in that moment, something in me broke, and something else clicked into place. That girl was me, months ago, silenced, shamed, frozen with fear. And now I knew what fear had cost me. I looked down at the custody document still in my hand, now damp with sweat. I could still hear Corvina's voice echoing in my ears, whispering, "Checkmate. No. No. If I stayed quiet now, I'd lose him forever. And I refuse." I walked back into the courtroom and sat taller. I didn't have polished lawyers or fake records. I didn't have connections or money or the favor of people in suits. But I had one thing they never expected: the truth. And I was ready to make it dangerous. The truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to be placed where everyone can see it. I returned to the courtroom after recess, with my steps steady and my breath slow. I wasn't sure where the courage came from. Maybe it was borrowed from every tear I refused to shed, or every silent insult I had swallowed. But I knew one thing as clearly as the heartbeat in my ears: I wouldn't walk out of this room defeated. When the judge gave me the floor, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I have a few things the court might want to see," I said calmly, setting a clear plastic evidence pouch on the desk in front of me. Inside was Dante's old phone, the one he'd left behind in the rush to disappear. I had nearly thrown it out weeks ago, thinking it was just another broken reminder. But something stopped me. Something told me to keep it, and now I understood why. I didn't manufacture accusations. I brought receipts. I pulled a single printed text thread from the folder. It was enlarged and highlighted, a screenshot blown up enough to be legible from across the room. I read it aloud, slowly, every word cutting like glass. "Drain her, erase her, and she'll disappear. Corvina will help finish it." My voice didn't waver. I let the silence do the rest. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge leaned forward, squinting. "And this is from the defendant's personal device?" "Yes, Your Honor. Unwiped, backed up, time-stamped. You'll find the phone's data matches the carrier records. And there's more." I held up a small white slip of paper. Dante's handwritten farewell from the hospital. Not my problem anymore. I didn't explain it. I didn't need to. The handwriting was his. The ink was still slightly smudged, like he'd been in a rush.
Next came the forged financial forms, multiple documents where my signature had been overwritten or replaced. One after another, I laid them out like cards in a losing game of poker. "This is what they tried to bury," I said, "and they nearly did, but not today." I sat down. The silence afterward felt heavier than any shouting match. It was the kind of stillness that happens right before a storm flips on its head. Corvina stood, visibly rattled. Her hands fluttered like she was brushing away invisible dust. This is being twisted. She's just bitter. That phone could have been tampered with. That note, that could be fake. Who keeps something like that for months?" The judge held up a hand. "Ms. Everill, did you have these documents authenticated?" "Yes, sir. The lab reports are included in the folder." His gaze moved to Corvina. "And you submitted a sworn affidavit stating you had no involvement in the financial decisions that removed Ms. Everill's name from shared assets?" I didn't know what Dante was doing. He told me—" Her voice cracked. "You lied," I said evenly. "Over and over again. You said I was unstable. You said I abandoned my child. You said I drained his money, and you knew none of that was true." Corvina's face turned pale. "Please, don't ruin what's left of our family." "I made mistakes, yes. But we were scared. We didn't know what else to do." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than anything she could have said, and this time, it wasn't the silence of submission. It was the sound of a door slamming shut in her face. The judge adjusted his glasses, looking down at the folder in front of him. "This changes everything. Miss Everill, I commend your composure and your documentation. These allegations warrant further legal scrutiny. We'll need to open an investigation into fraud, custody interference, and perjury." Dante's attorney tried to object, but the judge cut him off. "I suggest your client prepares for consequences." I didn't move. I just watched Dante. For the first time since this began, he looked nervous. Not angry, not smug, nervous. Like a man realizing the net he spun was closing in, and that the woman he thought would stay small and broken just lit a match under the whole thing. And then, it happened. The gallery, full of those who once whispered behind my back, neighbors, distant cousins, former church friends, fell silent. No more pitying glances, no more side eyes, just a quiet acknowledgement that the story they were told wasn't the truth. I wasn't the villain. I was the survivor. Outside the courthouse, the sky had darkened. Clouds hovered low, heavy, and gray, but not yet raining. I stood alone on the steps, the cool wind brushing my face. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the note again. That 5-word sentence that once broke me into pieces. Not my problem anymore. I folded it carefully, almost gently now, like something no longer had power over me, and I whispered, just loud enough for the wind to carry it away. "This time, it's my problem, not yours." Because 5 months later, when they saw me again, I wasn't the broken woman they left behind. That morning, the city outside my window glistened beneath a soft gold light. Sunlight shimmered off the tops of buildings and danced along the wide marble floors of the penthouse I now called home. The silence here was warm, not empty. It was a far cry from the cold nights I once spent counting heartbeats and holding on to Karen like he was the only thing keeping me upright. Because he was. Now, I sat on a velvet armchair, nursing a quiet cup of tea, the scent of chamomile rising in slow curls. Kieran was giggling from the floor, swaddled in a plush cashmere blanket, one hand batting at the stuffed giraffe Harlan had brought back from Berlin. I couldn't help but smile at how soft that blanket was. A strange thing to notice, maybe, but it stuck with me. Because the last time I had watched my baby wrapped in a blanket, we were soaked through in a storm. That old wool throw had been scratchy, cold, barely enough to keep him from shivering in my arms, And now here he was, sprawled across imported fabric in a skyscraper apartment I never imagined I'd touch, much less own. I didn't hear the elevator doors open, but I heard their footsteps. I turned my head calmly as Dante and Corvina stepped into my home like ghosts who'd taken a wrong turn. They paused a few feet inside, their expressions flickering between disbelief and panic. He wore a tailored coat, but it didn't sit right on him anymore, like the fabric knew it was hiding something rotten underneath. And her face, Corvina's, looked pale, drawn, lips pressed so tightly they were nearly colorless. Harlan stepped up beside me, smooth and unbothered, sliding his hand into mine. His presence alone was enough to still the air. He didn't need to say a word. "Venora?" Dante's voice cracked like he hadn't rehearsed what came next. Corvina clutched her purse like it could shield her. We didn't know. We thought you'd be ruined?" I asked softly, rising to my feet with Kiran balanced on my hip. "Cold? Alone?" They both nodded, silent. Their eyes swept the room, the open balcony, the crystal lighting, the curated art along the walls. And then their gaze landed on Harlan. When I laced my fingers with his, I watched Dante flinch. "You married him?" I smiled, not with cruelty, but with a grace they couldn't fake. "I did." Corvina fell to her knees first. I didn't move. I just watched as her shoulders heaved, her voice trembling like it could break itself into pieces. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was scared. Dante told me it was the only way to protect the family. I was wrong. Please, Venora. Please forgive me." Dante's knees hit the floor next. The sound echoed more than I expected. His pride had never bowed this low before. "Ven, we were stupid. We were desperate. But we're still family. Please, don't do this. Don't cut us out like this." I looked at them. Two people who once decided my voice didn't matter, my child didn't matter, my future wasn't worth preserving. And now, here they were, begging not for love, not even forgiveness, but for mercy against the silence that now belonged to me. Kiran wriggled in my arms, reaching toward the floor. I let him down gently. He crawled over to that same soft blanket, curling into it with a tiny sigh. I stared at it for a moment. That blanket. I could still feel the weight of that soaked one from 5 months ago, heavy with rain and shame, smelling of mildew and defeat. And now, this, soft, warm, clean. The contrast nearly made my throat tighten. But it didn't hurt anymore, because I had built something better, not just a home, a self, a version of me no one had the power to strip bare again. Harlan leaned in. "Ready?" I nodded once. Without looking back, I turned toward the elevator. Dante's voice rose behind me, shaky, desperate. "You can't just walk away." But I didn't respond, not with words. I simply took one last glance at them, on their knees, eyes wide, their power shattered, and I walked forward. As the elevator doors closed behind us, I slipped a hand into my coat pocket. That old note, the one Dante had left me in the hospital. Not my problem anymore. I unfolded it one last time, then slowly, calmly, tore it in half. We rode down in silence, the city unfolding beneath us. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's living so well that their cruelty can't touch you anymore. I held Kiran close as we stepped out into the sun. The wind that once stung my face now felt gentle, like it carried something new. Not fear, not grief, but peace. And if you've ever been thrown into a storm like I was, just know you can still build your own shelter, stronger than anything they tried to take away.